So hello and welcome. It always throws me off when people when they give me intros, because then I had an intro plan. I was going to tell you my name, now I'm thrown off. But I'm going to be talking about responsive web design. But before I do, I just want to thank Richard for approaching me and asking if we wanted to combine groups for at least one night. And I've always wanted to do that, or I've wanted to meet up with another group and combine forces. And so I jumped at the opportunity. And obviously it worked. I mean, this is great. This is a great turnout. I know this is the largest group we've had for HartfordAdobe, anyway. I'm not sure about the UX group. But yeah, so thanks to Richard and to all the other organizers in the CTUXPA. I had to memorize that, CTUXPA. The Connecticut User Experience Professionals Association, right? I thought HartfordAdobe User Group was long. So if we go back to November of 2011, I gave a presentation on responsive web. It was a very introductory presentation. And I asked the question when I first started, who here has heard of responsive web design? And I'm going to ask you the same thing. By show of hands, how many people have actually heard the term before? So I think that's everybody. So I might do it the other way, just see if anyone's brave enough to admit if they haven't heard. So raise your hand if you've never heard of it. Okay, thank you. Oh, we got a couple more, okay. Well, okay, so a year and a half ago when I asked that question, I had a good-sized group. It wasn't this size, but it was still a good-sized group, and the audience was made up of professionals, design professionals, and only 2 people had heard of it. So responsive web design has come a long way in a very short amount of time, and for good reason. We're going to get into that. And this was the actual slide. Hopefully you can see it. It says, responsive web design, the future of the web with a question mark. And that was, a year and a half ago, that was the question. Right? We didn't know, is it the future of the web? We were asking that question. And that question has been answered. And it's no, it's not the future of the web. It's here now. So I'm going to make the argument that the responsive part is probably eventually going to go away, right? Because we're just going to learn responsive will be just web design. And so what I did was, I was trying to figure out how can I see how many people are making responsive sites compared to static sites. So I thought about it for a little while, and I said, all right, what if I go to a template website and look at the last 100 websites and see how many were responsive and how many were static? Anyone have any guess on how many were responsive? So like Template Monster, I think it was Template Monster that I went to, sells templates. So people will design websites, they'll upload them to the marketplace, and then people can buy those templates and they can create their websites from there. People have different opinions on that. I don't want to get into that. But so I went there, and so the 100 most recent templates that have been uploaded there, how many were responsive and how many were static? 0? Who said 50? It was 49. So that was a really good guess. So that's almost half. So you get a t-shirt. And I have different sizes, and I have some books. So if you want to exchange that something, come see me after. Okay. So 49 out of 100 websites were responsive. I mean, that's huge, right? And so I also went to Google Trends. If you don't know, Google Trends, you can put in a phrase into Google Trends, and it'll tell you what the trends have been over the years. They don't give you the number of searches, but they show the percentages of from the most amount of searches at one time to the lowest. And can you guys see that? You can, good. All right, so I also wanted to compare it with something, so it just wasn't one thing on the graph. So I put in mobile web design, and that's the red line at the bottom. It's pretty much stayed steady since 2005. It's ticked up a little bit, but it's been about even. And then the blue line is responsive web. So this is people actually typing in responsive web design into Google. And at 2011, you can see how it just skyrockets. So the trend is definitely responsive web design. So I'm going to cross out the future of the web because I believe it is the way people are going to be learning and designing websites in the future. All right, so what the heck is responsive web design? I think it was coined by a guy named Ethan Marcotte, and he wrote an article back in May 25th, 2010, and he called it responsive web design. And it was very popular, so he wrote a few more articles, and then eventually turned it into a book called Responsive Web Design. And I picked it up for like $10 for my tablet. So I highly recommend that you pick it up. It's a really easy read, it's inexpensive, it's very good, and it's the first one. So if you want to learn more about where it came from, this is a great resource. And if you don't want to spend $10, if you don't want to make an investment of $10 to learn a new way of learning making websites, you can check out the articles. It actually has a lot of the information the book does. And the website, again, was a list apart. So before I get into the details of what it is, I want to talk about why responsive web design. Why do we need to learn a new way to build websites? And how do we build them now? Right? So when you first start building a website, one of the things, at least I did, and I know a lot of other people do, is they say, how wide am I going to make it? How many pixels am I going to make this website? And a very common number is 960 pixels wide. Does anyone know why 960 pixels is so popular? 17-inch screens. Raise your hand.
17-inch screens.
17-inch screens. So what do you mean by that?
Pixels would be average 17-inch screens, somewhere between 900 and 1,000.
Yeah, that's right. 1024 by 768 has been a very popular screen resolution size for a while. And so 960 pixels fits very, very comfortable inside that monitor. So who gets a t-shirt? Look at that, got a t-shirt going. But there's another reason. And show of hands, don't yell it out. Yes?
Size evenly into 12 or 16 columns.
That's right, it's easily divisible. So it's divisible by 2, 3, 4, 5, I don't know, is that right? Something like that. 6, 8, 10, 12, 15, 16, a whole bunch of numbers. So if you want to lay out your website in a grid system or into columns, you have a lot of different numbers to work with. Okay, I want to use 12 grids, or 12 columns, that'll work. If it's 16 columns, that'll work. So you get a t-shirt. I'll leave it up here. So why, if it's so great, why do we have to change? Well, how does that 960 pixel website look in a small device? Let's take 320 pixels wide, like the first iPhone. So what's that?
Very tiny.
Very tiny, right. Now, cell phones do a great job, or smartphones anyway, do a great job at rendering websites. You can double tap and it'll zoom in, and you can move it around, and you can get around, but it is not the best user experience. And on the other side, you have these really wide monitors. Who has a really big monitor? Yeah, so they're very, very popular. So if you have a monitor, like for this one I did 1920, right? That's almost 1,000 pixels of white space. So it's like a little tiny website in an ocean of pixels. So you could say, well, all right, well, if they're getting wider, why don't we just make the websites wider? Well, if you look back in 2009, 1024 by 768 had almost half of the market. And now if you look today, it hovers around 13%. And the most popular monitor size, 1366 by 768, which didn't even exist in 2009, is now more popular. So if we make our websites to what's popular now, what is it going to look like in 2 years, 3 years, 4 years from now? We don't know. So to future-proof your website, taking a certain amount of pixels might not be the best strategy. In mobile, you can say, well, I've looked at my analytics, and I only have like 10% of the people coming to my website on a mobile device. Do I really need to put this much time, effort, and money into changing out my website? Well, it's great. It's a great practice to look at the analytics and to see who your audience is, for sure. But if you look, sometime this year or next year, they say that globally, internet or mobile internet users will outnumber desktop internet users. So the trend, even though it's only 10% now, which is not insignificant, by the way, 10%, but the trend is up. It's definitely going up, and it's not going anywhere. So if you don't have a mobile strategy, you may want to consider one. All right, so to summarize, responsive web design, the reason why, right, that's what we're trying to answer, why, is because we don't know how people are going to be viewing our website, right? It could be in a smartphone, or a mini tablet, or a normal size tablet, a notebook, a tablet, or a desktop, a giant monitor, a web TV, right? Those are becoming popular. Now we have glasses, right? There are Google glasses. They're going to be having websites. I mean, I don't even know how you do that. But so we have no idea how people are going to be rendering our websites. So that's the reason why responsive web design is such a good conversation to have. Okay, so let's say you don't want to do responsive. So what are your other alternatives? One is to do nothing. So let's say, and sometimes that makes sense. Let's say you have an intranet, and everybody on this intranet has the same size monitor and has the same browser, probably IE7 or something. And you really wouldn't need to do responsive. Responsive might be a waste of time. So there are situations where responsive might not be the way to go, and that making a website like you always have is the right way. Second strategy is mobile site. So if you go to walmart.com on your desktop, you'll go to walmart.com. But if you go on your phone, it'll be mobile.walmart.com. So they have a mobile site, and then they have a regular site. And that's not a bad strategy. You do have to maintain two. Well, now the tablets are becoming more popular. Now people are, our companies, they are having a mobile site, a tablet site, and a desktop site. And I would imagine when web TVs become more popular, you'll have a mobile site and a tablet site and a desktop site and a TV site. And who knows where else that can go. So it's great because you can be really specific with the device, but you do have to maintain. And the third way is adaptive, and that's where responsive web design falls under. So basically you have one document and it adapts depending on the size of the browser rendering it. Okay. So the 3 core ingredients, according to Ethan Marcotte, who coined the phrase, the 3 core ingredients of responsive web is a flexible grid-based layout, flexible images and media queries. So we like the idea. So I showed you before this 960 pixel width. We have a certain amount of columns. That is a great way to go. And a very popular grid system is 960.gs. And this is actually a good website to show because I can go down here and I can actually have a thing that shows you the grids. So these are non-responsive grid-based layouts. So here they have 12 columns, 16 columns. And that's good. But what we actually want is we do want the grid-based layout because it's a great way to make websites, right? It keeps everything organized. It's cleaner looking. But we don't want it to be static. So a good example of a flexible grid-based layout is the golden grid system. And it's a good one to show as well because it also has that JavaScript layover. So you can actually see the columns. And if I were to move this, you can see that it continues to keep the columns, but it's now flexible. This one actually is pretty cool because once you get down to a certain point, it actually turns from 8 columns to 4 columns. And if this was wider, it would actually turn into 16 columns. So this is good. This is what we want. We want a grid-based layout, and we want it to be flexible. Okay, so flexible images and media. Let's say we have a flexible layout, like I just showed you, but then you stick an image in there. What happens? It breaks, right? Because the image isn't flexible, but the layout is. So what we want to do is we want to make the images flexible as well. So here I just have a quick illustration of the image breaking inside when the browser is smaller. But we actually want the image to be flexible and stay within the grid. And the way we do that is in the HTML and the styles, we want to say image max width 100%. And don't confuse that with width 100%. Width is a little bit different, Width will make the image the same size as the layout. So if the layout is larger than the image, it'll actually expand the image and really pixelate it, which we don't want. Where max width, what it does is you can make the image smaller if the layout gets smaller, but if it gets larger or wider than the image will stay its natural size. So it's important to have max width. Okay, so the third core ingredient is a media query. And so basically how this works is there's a lot of different types of media queries, but the ones we care about are min width and max width. And what that means is you put this in your styles, and depending on the width of your browser, so in this case, in the very top one, it says min width 480 pixels. So that means that the browser, the width of it has to be at least a minimum of 480 pixels. If that happens, it'll show the styles within that media query. And if it's not, it won't show them. And I'm going to get into that in a little bit, into the more specifics. Okay, to summarize what responsive web design is, instead of trying to paraphrase, I figured I would just take a quote out of Ethan Marcotte's book, because this is really a perfect explanation. Responsive design is about serving one HTML document to countless browsers and devices using flexible layouts and media queries to ensure that design is as portable and accessible as possible. And I think that's a perfect way of saying it. So now what? So now I'm going to show you actually how it works in the code. If you don't do HTML or CSS, hopefully you'll survive this. This won't be the rest of the presentation, so don't run away. Does anyone have any questions so far? 80 people, no questions?
You answered my question.
I answered it already. Okay, I like to hear that. All right, so this is an HTML document, and it doesn't have anything in it. So I'm going to add some stuff. So I'm going to put an H1 tag, and we're going to call it responsive web design. H2, 3 core ingredients. We're going to do an unordered list. Bear with me for a minute. All right, so who remembers all 3 core ingredients? Raise your hand if you think you know. Really? You guys are not shy, huh? Oh, I see one in the back. Okay, what's the first one?
Flexible grid-based layout.
Yes. Okay, give me a second.
Flexible images.
Yep. Yes. So flexible layout, flexible images, and media queries.
CSS grid.
Yeah, that's right. I did have CSS3 in there. And you get a t-shirt, by the way. I'll put it over here. You got the best t-shirt. Okay, so I'm going to put this in a div, in a container. Well, first, I'm going to show you what it looks like. Really basic website, obviously. So that's it, our website. That's what we're going to be working with. So now I'm going to put this into a div. I'm going to call it container, something really original. And I'm going to create some styles. And I'm going to say container, width, 960 pixels. And just so we can see what that looks like, I'm going to say background, color, and we'll use a grayish color. All right, so this is what it'll look like. So this is 960 pixels wide. I'm going to actually add a little bit more text to give that a little bit more depth. Okay, so this is 960 pixels wide. This is what we were working with before, that 960.js. Okay, so we don't want that because if we were to make the browser smaller, it breaks our design, right? And that's not what we want. I shouldn't say it breaks it. We can't see some of the design or the content. So I'm going to change the width to 100%. I'm going to save it, and we're going to take a look at it again. So now, if I move or I make the browser smaller, you can see the text is wrapping. Pretty impressive, huh? We'll get there. Okay, so now if I make it 50%, you'll see that it takes up 50%, or half of the browser. And as I move it, it continues to take up 50%. All right, so now what I'm going to do, I'm going to copy the container, paste it. So now we have two. And to make it so they go side by side, I'm going to say float left. And you'll see what that does in a second. All right, so now we have two. And at the basic level, this is really a flexible layout with two columns. Normally you wouldn't have just two columns, but in this case we do. And if I make it smaller, you can see that they each take up 50%. So that is the first core ingredient. The second one was flexible images, right? So I'm going to add an image called UXJPEG. I had this set up. Now, it's hidden. And the reason is we have a flexible layout, but we don't have a flexible image. So it breaks out of the div. Now, in most cases, this is bad, but there are actually designers out there that use this to their advantage. So they'll have an image that's really wide, and they'll put the most important stuff on the side that will always show, and they put less important information. It could be like the ocean or mountains or something. And so they let it break. And so if you're looking at it through a cell phone, you see the important information. And then if you're on a wide monitor, you'll see the important information with mountains in the background or something like that. So it's not always bad, but usually you want the image to be flexible as well, and that's what we're going to do. So in the styles, I'm going to say IMG, and that's not OMG, it's IMG. We're going to say max width 100%. Remember, that's not width, it's max width. And now when I hit refresh, it fits its layout because it's now flexible. If I make it smaller, you can see that it flexes. So that's the two core ingredients, right? We have the flexible layout, and now we have flexible images. The third one is media queries. So I'm going to put in here, media, screen and min width 480 pixels. So what that means is, if the browser has a minimum width of 480 pixels, it will show the styles inside this. So let's make, just to show that, let's say background. Need to add the container. What I'm going to do is I'm going to grab the container, copy, paste it into here. Let's make the background color blue, something really attractive. So now that's blue, and when I make it smaller, once it hits 480, it changes to how we had it before. So because we added that media query, we're able to change the site, or the page, or the styles. So when you first start doing the media queries, you have a decision to make. You can say, all right, how am I going to make this? Am I going to go mobile first or desktop first? And the idea behind that is, you say, okay, I have a design that's made up for the desktop. And now I want it to look a certain way, let's say for a smaller device. So I have my styles, and now I'm going to add new styles using a media query that will do things to affect the mobile device. So you're adding styles to change it for the mobile device. The other way to do it is you do mobile first, saying, okay, I'm going to have a design for a mobile device, and then I'm going to add styles to change it for the desktop. Now, best practice, or the trend right now, is to do mobile first, and then add styles for larger devices. And there's a few reasons why. One reason is content. So when you design a website for a smaller device, you're forced to put the most important stuff on there, right? You're like, okay, I have a very small amount of space. I have to make sure I get the most important stuff in there. And so you're starting from a more basic place where you have a lot of space. Like if you have a big desktop site and you have lots of space, you're going to try to fill it up. So that's one of the reasons why people say mobile first is good. But it's also starting out with mobile and then adding on sort of makes more sense, because as it gets bigger, you're adding styles. But that's not always the case. It's not always better. Let's say you get someone who hands you a website or a web design, and it's desktop, and says, make it responsive. And that's kind of the joke going around now, that all the clients are going around saying, make my site responsive. Like you have like a button to push to make it responsive. And so now you're in a situation where you already have their styles for the desktop or the design, and now you have to add stuff to make it more mobile friendly. So desktop or mobile first. Okay, and so by the way, you can add as many media queries as you want, and you can change that number. I added 480, but that could really be any number. It doesn't matter. Yes?
When you have a mobile device and you rotate it 90 degrees, so you're going from vertical to horizontal, does this see that? Or are you stuck with 480 and, let's say, the vertical?
What's supposed to happen is that it will change, because it will know. But there are some bugs on some devices that it will keep it. The newer ones are better, but iOS had a problem for a little while.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but yeah, and there are ways of fixing it, like there are workarounds, but they're sorting all that out, where what's going to happen is all the devices are going to be able to know that they've changed and respond to it.
Thank
you. So in this case, let's say we went from 480, and the next media query is 780. So let's say we want to make this yellow. So we have yellow, and then blue, and then gray. So what do you think? Should we change this? Change the UX site to this, Richard? What do you think? Yeah.
You need some animated GIFs in there.
Oh yeah, that's a great idea. I'll have to have a committee come up with that. Okay, so the way we have it now is we have two columns, and even when you're down here, and this doesn't look very good, right? Well, in general, it doesn't look very good, but having the two columns makes it worse, because it sits on a small device. You really probably want to make that one column. So we're going to change that. So we can say is in the original styles, not in a media query, width 100%. And then, I'm going to change this color. I can't take that blue. So nothing happened, and the reason is it would only affect the mobile part of it. So right now, for the mobile, it's because it's less than 480 pixels, it has one column. But as soon as we go over 480, we get the two. And then, of course, once we hit 780, it turns yellow. And so you can change all of these things to fit your design. Media queries, that's usually what trips people up. Does that make sense? Does anyone have any questions about that? No? Okay, good. Okay, so those are the 3 core ingredients. One common question is, like, where do I start? And the way that we've been doing it up until now is people will either, or designers would use a wireframe, or they'll mock up the site using Fireworks or Photoshop. How many people mock up their websites using Photoshop? Yeah, a good amount. So a lot of people do it that way. So for responsive, how do you do that? Right? You have your desktop version, that's what you normally make. So if you're going to do a responsive site, what would you do? For mobile, you would just make a thinner version, right? And then you would just change things around. And then for tablet, you would make, another version for tablets. And that's what's happening. One issue with that is, first of all, they can start adding up, right? So you have the home page, you have a couple internal pages, the checkout, and they start to add up, because normally it was each page had 1 Photoshop file. Now you have 3. But also, when you first start, you say, well, how wide am I going to make the mobile one? How wide am I going to make the tablet design? And how wide am I going to make the desktop one? And so you say, okay, well, I'll just take the most common mobile width and the most common tablet width and the most common desktop. But you're sort of back to the problem is, over the years, those are going to change. So that's one issue with coming up with designs using Photoshop or Fireworks or any of those other programs. Also, it's sort of like the old problem where the designer comes up with something in Photoshop and then gives it to the developer. The developer pretty much makes it as best they can. They make it look exactly the same. But what if you have a mobile version, a tablet version, and a desktop version? What about what's in between? The developer doesn't exactly know your intentions as a designer, right? So how do you want it to change? Do you want it to change exactly, for the mobile, let's say you make it 480 pixels, do you want everything to change then? Because in between, there might be some design breaking. And does the developer decide, how to fix that, or does the designer come back? So a lot of companies are trying to put the designer and developer in the same place and having them work together. And that's not always practical. So Adobe came up with a new tool called Adobe Reflow. And what this is supposed to do, it is supposed to take a program where the designer can use and the developer can use. And the developer will be able to see the designer's intentions. And that'll make more sense once I show you. Okay, so what I did was, I took the top part of CTUXPA.org, or is it CTUPA.org? I'm not sure. And I put it into Reflow, meaning I mocked up the site. And since it was already a desktop, and actually I'll bring up the site just to give you a reference if you haven't been there. So this is the working site now. And I'm going to pull this to the right. And as you can see, it's not responsive. It says responsive design on it, but it's not responsive. That must be confusing. Okay, so in Reflow, what I did, I didn't want to do the whole site because I didn't have that much time. So I just took the very top, and I basically, what I did was I would inspect how the site was built, and I would take, okay, this button is this wide and this tall and this much padding. And I was able to redesign it into Reflow. And so this is the canvas. I call it a canvas. It's so new, I don't even know what they call it. I'm going to call it the canvas. And then you can take, you can create a div, which they call a box, text, or an image. And that brings up the image. So let's say for the logo, I just took the image from the site, and I just uploaded it into the canvas. And there it is, and I was able to, I can add any kind of styles I want. So I could add padding or margin, or I can give it radius, shadows. Anything you can pretty much do in CSS, you can do in Reflow to make it look that way. On the right-hand side, I made a search area, just like how it's done on the website. And then the navigation, and then one of the images. And so at this point, what I can do is I can view it, and I can actually preview it in Chrome. So here's the my version. This is the UXPA. So it's actually I jumped ahead because it's a little bit responsive. which you probably saw coming. But these are really, it looks pretty similar. It's not perfect, but it's good enough for mocking it up. So the idea was, the client comes to me and says, make my site responsive. If Richard came to me and said, make my site responsive, right? So I could put it into Reflow, and I can, now that I have the elements in there, I can start moving them around depending on how wide the browser is. And so before I talked about one of the problems of Photoshop is you have to pick up front how many pixels. So I guess I'll take the width that's really popular right now for mobile, and I'll start there. And then you take the tablet, which is really popular, but what's in between? Another way of doing it, and which Reflow allows you to do, is you can basically say, all right, I like this design the way it is, but where does it break? So I'm going to move this way. I actually have something set for where it breaks. So I'm just going to move this here, just for the idea. So right now, it's not broken, still looks pretty good. And at this point, the navigation, see how the About button goes away? So you're like, okay, I'm going to back it off a bit. And up on top, there is something that shows or that represents a media query. And so I'm going to put that right there. So right when here, this is where I want the mobile. Now, it's probably not the best place for it, and it's not the best design. I didn't have a lot of time. But the idea was to change it into something that would make more sense for a smaller device. So I made the buttons a little bit bigger. I made them stacked. I stacked them horizontally, or vertically rather. And so, but the basic idea is now you can take these elements and you can move them around and do whatever you want and put media queries or breaking points where you want, and Reflow will know to change it up. And so now I can take this and give it to a developer, and the developer knows exactly what's going on. Okay, at 700 pixels, that's where they want the breaking point. That's where I change it from this design to that design. And I didn't have to pick one up front, a width up front. And if the client doesn't like it and they want to change it, one second, if they want to change it, you can go back and change it. You don't have to worry about going back and changing the size of your Photoshop files. Yes?
Does this work well with InDesign? Or is it, how would you bring all the artwork in?
Well, right now they just announced that in June, Photoshop will push everything in here. InDesign, no. As far as I know, that's not happening. But I would imagine if it's happening in Photoshop, it'll start happening with the other programs as well.
So right now, you just have to export, have the file in Photoshop, slice it, and then bring in the images in here.
For the next few weeks, you'd have to take it piece by piece and bring in the images. What I did, that's a really good question, because what I did to start this, I don't know best practices because the program is still really new, but on the bottom, you can actually look at the DOM. It shows you the layout. And you can hide and show different elements. So I actually, let's see, where is it? I took a screenshot. No, that's not it. Oh, maybe my stuff is hovering over it. Well, what I did was I took a screenshot of the CTUXPA.org site, and I just brought it into this, and I put it in the back, and then I started designing over it. So I didn't necessarily take all the elements, bring them in as images, and then change them over to the CSS. I actually took one image and then started making buttons and stuff over them. But I did have to bring in the logo, and the buttons, that's actually an image behind them. You know, the blue gradient going across? And I can show you that, actually. So
about how much time did you spend on that process?
It's about 62 hours. No, I'm just kidding. That's a good question. I would say probably, I don't know if I want to admit this, maybe an hour to do this. Okay, so that's how much I like the group. I'm willing to spend an hour to do this. I'll take one clap. I might take a t-shirt. So I clicked the navigation div. I don't know if you can see it or not, but I clicked it. And on the left-hand side, you can see all what they call the layout. That's the layout panel. And to the right of it is the style. And if you go under backgrounds, you see navbg.jpg. I swiped that from the UX site, don't tell anybody. And I put it in here, and I told it, where did I tell it? Oh yeah, you click here, and I told it to repeat X, just like how it is on the site. So it basically repeats the image over and over and over again, but only horizontally. And if I wanted to, I could say, repeat X and Y, which would make the image go up and down, or I could say don't repeat, just show once. So basically anything you can do in CSS, maybe I shouldn't say anything, but most of the common things you can do in CSS, you can do the exact same thing in Reflow, and it'll show up on the canvas. Because I believe they built this on top of like WebKit, which is what Chrome and Safari use. So if you add padding on here, it actually shows in the canvas. And then when you view it in Chrome, then it shows there too. Now the common question is, well, how's the code? Can I just take the code from Chrome and put it on my site? I wouldn't recommend that. That's not what this tool is for. This is really for mocking up. And I haven't done wireframes in this, but I would imagine it's just as easy as mocking it up. But it's not really meant to export code. It's not a WYSIWYG, I guess is what I'm trying to say. But another thing about with a developer is the developer could click onto that div that the designer made and go look. All right, okay, repeat X, I get it. And then it's easier for them to develop. So it really brings the designer and the developer closer together. Any questions so far?
Why didn't they put it in the Dreamweaver?
The question is, why didn't they bring it into Dreamweaver? Would you really want it in Dreamweaver?
No, I'm just throwing a question out there.
No, it's a great question. They wanted to build something that was fast. See, I don't know if they've announced this, but it seems pretty obvious. They're making tools that do specific things, and then they're going to tie them into each other. Instead of having these big bloated, do I say that? Some of these programs are bloated? Photoshop is a beast, right? Dreamweaver is a beast. They want to do everything for everyone. And these tools are more like for specific things. So if they were to have to put this into Dreamweaver, they'd have to worry about backwards compatibility and all kinds of other things. Now they're on their own, and it's really great. Yes?
Would Reflow give these same benefits to the site you're designing Business Catalyst?
Business Catalyst, great. Yes, I mean it's the same idea because you're mocking it up. If anyone doesn't know, Business Catalyst is an Adobe product that it hosts. You can host and they host it, and you can build and manage websites using Business Catalyst. It's a great tool. I highly recommend it. We'll have to have another presentation. So since this is just a mocking tool, you would mock this up, and it doesn't really matter where it's going. Does that answer your question? Yeah. Okay. So other really cool features. Well, first of all, remember I told you that when you start doing media queries, the first thing you have to do is figure out, am I going to do mobile first or desktop first? That's exactly what you have to do at Reflow too. So at the very top right, there's a plus sign. I'm going to click and hold down. And it shows orientation, maximum or minimum. That's the max width, min width that was in the media query. And by default, it's desktop first. So if you don't want to build or mock this out desktop first, you'd actually switch over to minimum. The reason why I kept it is because I was working with an existing site that was already, the design was already at the desktop. So I wanted to add styles as it got smaller. But if I was going to start from scratch, I would probably go mobile first, and I would have clicked minimum. By the way, this is where you manage the media queries, because you can actually have as many media queries as you want. So if I click this button, it'll add a media query up here. And if I were to hold this down, I could go down and delete it. And so it's for anyone that doesn't know, media queries and breakpoints are often used for the same thing. Okay, on the right-hand side, you'll see this, it looks like a little mobile device. So you click this, and it says it wants to attach to Adobe Edge Inspect. Now I was going to show you Inspect. What it does is if you do mobile, if you do responsive web design, or I guess any kind of web design, you're going to need different devices to check, right? So what happens is you end up getting all these different devices, all these different cell phones and tablets, and at least for me, they end up laying all around me, right? And then when I want to check one, I have to like turn it on and go to that page and then test it out. Well, Adobe came up with probably the most underrated tool probably in the last couple of years. It is awesome. What you do is you hook Adobe Edge Inspect up into your computer, right? And they talk through Wi-Fi. And while you're working in Reflow, or if you're just browsing the internet on Chrome, everything you do on the desktop shows up on all your devices. So you could have 20 different devices, and while you're working on Reflow or just going around in Chrome, if you want to test your design in Chrome, it'll show up automatically live. You go to another page, all of your devices change all at the same time. Huge time saver. I can't tell you how annoying it is to have to, you make one little tweak and you have to go to each and every single device and then test it out. Now you can just see it all over the place. It's really cool.
Does that require an app on each one of those devices, or is it in the browser?
Yeah, good question. So you have to download Inspect from the Chrome store, and each app or each device you have to download an app. It's free, and it's both on Android and Apple. I'm not sure about Microsoft.
The big question here is, you're saying everything's being viewed on Chrome and Apple and Safari. Well, how does this stuff work on the percentage of people who are going to watch it on Microsoft stuff?
Oh, okay, so good question.
Because I know there's things that work only on Apple. As long as you're on an Apple and you're looking at Safari, everything's great. And
Yeah.
some people use Chrome, it looks great there. But then there's always these things you read in the book. If you're doing it on Explorer, do these 10 different codes to make it work here.
Yeah, don't you love that?
All the time. So I haven't heard you say the word Explorer.
I say that as little as often.
Most people are still on Microsoft.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So I think really the question is, what browsers can you use for responsive design in general? And all the modern ones, of course, all the regular devices that are coming out. For IE8, IE7, do we care about IE6? I don't.
No.
There's it's called a polyfill or JavaScript that will actually replicate it. So you add the JavaScript on to your site, and you say if it's Internet Explorer 8 or below, then just mimic responsive. Or you can do a separate style sheet if that's your thing. You say if it's less than IE9, then
Or don't
do
worry
these
about
styles. Or don't worry about it. Yeah, I like that.
I worked with an agency once that said if people don't have a certain computer that we're building this site to, we don't care if they see this one. It just went out.
Wow. I guess that's a good place to be if you can do that. Sure. I don't think most of my customers would disagree. Any other questions? Yes.
This tool, can you use this on a Microsoft machine, or is this developing on a Mac?
Microsoft too.
Okay. The price?
Okay, so Reflow is included into the Creative Cloud. So if you're a Creative Cloud subscriber,
Okay.
you'll get Reflow. You know what? You might actually be able to do it for now. You might actually be able to get this program without being in Creative Cloud. I'd have to look into that. So if you're not a Creative Cloud subscriber, check that out. Or maybe I'll put some. We're going to release some information after this with links and stuff. So I'll put that information into. I'll find out if it's free for non-subscribers. But if you do, if you are a subscriber, it's included. And for most people, it's $50 per month to be a subscriber. And you get all of the Adobe products pretty much, all the design tools. Anyway. All right, so one more cool thing about Inspect is how much of a pain is it to actually take a screenshot on your device. So you want to take a screenshot and then send it to somebody or just look at it, right, for reference. So you guys know how to take a screenshot on an iPad? I see some nods.
Button power.
Yeah, okay. Well, what about for Android? Android tablet? Yeah, it depends on which one though, too, doesn't it? So there's hundreds of Android devices, and so to go to each device and try to take a screenshot, and each one does it differently. Not the best job to have. So Adobe Edge Inspect you go in and you click screenshot. And it takes a screenshot of all of the devices and puts them on your computer into the folder that you want it in, just like that. How cool is that? I don't know, I get excited about these things. So, okay. So Inspect works with Reflow. Another thing that works with Reflow is Adobe and Google and I think some other companies got together and they released a bunch of open source fonts. And so that's also included in Reflow. So you can take the text in Reflow and you can use any of those open source fonts. And then when you create this website, you can use the exact same fonts. So basically you can bring in like hundreds, if not thousands of fonts into Reflow and use it. So that's pretty cool. Instead of trying to find a font in Reflow that's on your computer that's similar to the one you're using online, now you have more choices. Yes?
Does it work with Typekit? Or?
Well, yeah, so there's the open source with Adobe and Google and all that, and then Adobe recently, probably about a year ago, acquired Typekit. And Typekit is a server-based font library, is that a good way of saying it? And what you can do is you can say, instead of all the web-safe fonts that you would normally do, like Arial or Times New Roman or whatever we used to do when we made websites, now you can say, I want this crazy font that lives on a server, and when someone goes to my page, it'll get pulled in from Typekit. So no, it doesn't. But a lot of the same fonts, I believe, that are in Typekit are also in the open source. And I would imagine that they will eventually bring Typekit into this.
Yeah, they were talking about doing that later
Oh,
this year.
okay, good. You knew your own answer.
Well, I didn't know if it played nice with the software.
Oh, sure, I got you. Anything else? Okay. What do you think? Any strong opinions one way or the other? Easier, yeah. That's the idea, for sure. I was going to show you Inspect, but I couldn't get something to do with the connection here. I wasn't able to do it. But it's such a big room, it probably would have been hard to show. So the next thing is a plugin that you can use with Chrome. It's right up at the top. Let me go to a good site. All right, so media queries. This is a site that takes basically a lot of responsive sites and just lists it out so you can see it. And so it's kind of fun to go in here and look at the different sites. So I'm just going to click on the first one. Hopefully it's a good one. And so it's responsive, right? So it has different media queries. So if I go up in the top and I click, it's called Responsive Inspector. It'll actually show me all the different media queries that are in here on this site. And so I can go through and see how they did things. But I can also go right to the code. So let's say I said, all right, I want to see the code or the styles. I click this, and it'll bring me right to where that media query is. Of course, the site uses minified or whatever, so it looks like a bunch of garbage, but I should have picked another site. But you get the idea. So you click this, and you can look at any of the code from there.
How do you get that plugin?
Chrome. So you go to the Chrome store, or Google store, I forget what they call it, but it's the Chrome browser. And you type in Responsive Inspector, and you'll be able to find it. Someone from Adobe and a bunch of other people recently created it. It's on version 1, but they plan on creating a lot more features to it. But what you can also do is you can take a screenshot, and let's see, if I take a screenshot, it's taking the screenshot of that size that I wanted, and now here's the screenshot, right? And it says, do I want to save it to my computer, or do I want to put it on Behance, which is another recent Adobe acquire, which is basically for designers where you want to upload your portfolio, you can do it on Behance, or you can trash it. So really cool way to, and you don't have to go to other sites. I mean, this would be great on your own site, right? You want to test it. You create a responsive site, and you want to test it in the different sizes. You hit screen capture, And it doesn't just take it where you see, it actually takes a picture of the whole entire page, which is pretty amazing. Yes?
What's with the different colors on there? Is that for different like media properties? Or?
That's a good question. I don't know. I don't know if it just differentiates them or if it's for the size. Great question.
Or for different categories of device.
Max and min.
Oh yeah, very good. So the max is orange and the min is blue, and I imagine sometimes you can combine the two. If you say if it's larger than this size and less than this size, work, it's probably called for that too. You can also make the browser the size that you want. So if I just want to make, just to get to that size to see what it looks like, I just click that button and it automatically goes. So make it a little bigger, go over here, make it bigger. And so just a lot faster. Okay, so another thing, there are frameworks that you can use. You don't have to start from scratch if you don't want to. I recommend trying one, trying to make a responsive site on your own from scratch because it's a great way to learn. But if you want to see how other people are doing it or you want to do it quickly, there are some frameworks out there that you can start with. So the most popular one by far is Bootstrap. It was created from a couple guys that worked at Twitter, and they keep it up. And there's thousands of people that contribute to this, so it's not a bad place to be. But the basic idea is that it's a library. It has a CSS library and a JavaScript library, and it makes developing a site, or at least a basic site, really, it's easy and quick. Developers love it because it has a design side to it. They don't have to worry about the design. They can just do what they want quickly. And it's a great way to either make a prototype or to create a base where then the designer can design on top of it. So you can, I won't go through the whole thing, but you can basically see the grid system here. Let me go to something better. So you can see the typography, and you can see how everything would work. So if I make something bold, what will it look like? If I want, let's get something good. Like the forms. I want to make a form. I want it to look good. So let's say I want the search button to be to the right of the text field. Just really quick things that will just make that happen instead of trying to figure it out yourself. So Bootstrap is a good way to go. Another popular one is Foundation. And this one actually, a lot of people like this one as well. And the third one is Skeleton. This one's really light, I guess is a good way of saying it. So what they're trying to do is be as light as possible, but give you the options to be able to create your own grid system. And these are all responsive. That's why I'm showing you this. Any questions about that? Okay, good. So I guess the only last thing I would say is if you wanted to, where'd it go? Did I get rid of it? I would say if you wanted to browse through a bunch of responsive sites and just take a look at how everyone is doing it, I think Media Queries is a really good place to go. And I'll put a link with all this other stuff I talked about. Me and Richard will get together and get it online. So does anyone have any more questions? That's the end of my presentation.
Scott?
Yes?
Now, planning for images that are going to stretch and shrink, what is a good, 72 DPI was always the standard resolution. Some websites are going with higher resolution. What's a good DPI and size to plan for an image that could possibly stretch to an enormous size? That's what scares me the most.
That's a really good question.
You start with a mobile, and then it's going to later go to a desktop, your tiny little image that worked for mobile and a fast load. Now, all of a sudden, it's going to go to a huge page.
Like a retina screen is the same resolution as print now.
Yeah, it's crazy, huh?
If you're doing all your
So-
images 300 DPI for print, and a retinal screen's like, 360?
Images is a great question. So if you look at this right now, that image is not as effective as it is on a desktop, right? Can you read that? No, it's difficult, right? Not the best user experience. So what do you do with images? So when people started doing responsive, they said, okay, what I'll do is I'll put 3 images on there, and I'll just say when it's smaller than a certain width, I'll hide the 2 big ones, and I'll have my mobile one. And then when it gets to tablet size, I'll hide the mobile image and I'll hide the desktop image. But then we figure out that the browser is actually downloading all three. So now you're tripling the how you're tripling the size. And if you're on a mobile device and you don't have a great connection, do you really appreciate downloading these, a desktop image that's 1 million pixels wide? No, right? So images have been a tough thing. So I use Business Catalyst. We talked about that earlier a little bit. There are different ways of doing this. How do I explain this? So you can have a server figure out what device is rendering the page and then deliver the appropriate image. I use Business Catalyst. They have something built in, and I can say if it's a phone, show them this picture. If it's a tablet, show them this picture. And if it's a desktop, show them this image. And that's really nice because now the user only gets the image that they were supposed to get. And there are other ways of doing that using the server. Also, there are ways, like I showed you earlier, that when you have a flexible layout but a fixed image, and how if the fixed image is wider than in the layout, I call it breaking, but it would actually, you would only see part of the image. That's another solution. So like I talked about earlier, you can put the important stuff in the area that a mobile device will use, and then for a desktop, you'd see the whole thing. You still have it's a big image for a small device. There's also some JavaScript too, some clever things out there that will send the right image to the right device.
Why can't you just modify the tag that pulls the image in with JavaScript when you're resizing it?
Yeah, so you could do something like with Ajax that pulls the image from somewhere else and brings it onto the page. I guess that's what you mean.
Change the source of the tag, it's going to change the image.
How do you change the source tag? Because what you're doing with responsive web design is it's a media query that changes the styles of the HTML on the page. How would you change the tag on the page unless you used...
We have to use JavaScript.
Right.
Catch the orientation change or size change.
Yeah. What was that?
Use like background image. So you start as small and as you got bigger, change the URL of the background.
You'd have to use JavaScript to change the URL. The responsive stuff only changes the style. So.
You mean the background image in?
Oh, I see what you mean. I don't think that works. I remember reading something about that, and it still brings in the image. Do you have an answer to that?
Yeah, you can actually layer your text on top of an image, then you're going to say fluid and kind of have the text go down proportional.
Okay, so that would be another solution for something like this. So the image shows, but then you just use the text to change.
Yeah, it's a little bit different mentality. You want to take the text out of your image when you do that approach. Where traditionally you'll cut it as part of the image itself.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. Absolutely. So yeah, so you wouldn't need a really wide, because if the image is a monitor and then you have a bunch of text, right? If you just take the monitor and then just take the text out of the image and use the responsive to change it, that would obviously make a lot of sense. Yeah, thank you. So another one is video. People say that once images, you get over the conversation with images, it's like, well, what about video? How do you take like a YouTube video and put it on here? There are plugins for that as well. Sometimes you can say, depending on how it's being put in there, you can just say whatever the tag is, you just make it sort of like an image. You'd say, max width 100%, and it'll act just like an image. But a lot of things don't. But there are so many plugins online that people have come up with solutions. And actually, I have one. I can't remember its name. I think it's VidFit or something like that, where you just add it to your site, and it will make the videos responsive. But I'll look that up, and we'll add it to this list. It's starting to be a long list. Anything else?
Scott,
Yes.
you touched on something when you said it's not WYSIWYG.
Yeah.
And I don't know about everyone else, but there was sort of a big sigh of disappointment when I heard that.
Right, because you'd like Reflow to export the HTML and the CSS.
Well, I'm waiting for a tool where I can sort of drag stuff on to a canvas, put it where I want it, and size it to where I want it.
Yeah.
You laugh, but I actually built a site on GoDaddy
Yeah.
And they have a tool just like that. And you can grab a paragraph, plunk it down, move it to the spot you like it, resize it to where you want it. Then you can grab a slider, plunk it down.
This isn't the GoDaddy user group. I'm just kidding. I understand what you're saying.
It's coming, but
Yeah.
I don't really know.
No, I think that's a really good point. So the Adobe product, that would work well for that. Have you heard of Adobe Muse?
I have heard of Muse. At the Christmas party that we had, someone mentioned using it.
Yeah, I talk about it a lot, don't I?
I know, I think it was one of our group, one of on our group, I can't remember, Snap.
Well, I think I know what you're talking about. So we had just a quick side thing. We had a Christmas party where a bunch of people came. I had someone from Vermont drive 3 hours to our user group. And she was a Muse user, an Adobe Muse user. A muser? I'm going to start calling them users. So she drove 3 hours to be at that party, and so she came because she knew that Business Catalyst sponsored the party, and so Muse connects to Business Catalyst, so she drove 3 hours to be at our user group. I thought that was great. 3 hours there, 3 hours back, 6 hours to come to our user group. That's how great, and you guys are so close, and a lot of you aren't showing. She drove 6 hours to be at our user group.
Did she get a t-shirt?
Yeah. No, she didn't. Oh. So I think that's my time. Is that... Oh, okay. I thought I was like, okay, we're really obvious. Get out. Yeah, right. It was the Muse. So Muse is a product that Adobe has created that is very similar to InDesign. In fact, the team working on Muse was the same team that helped out with InDesign. So the InDesign team, a lot of the members from InDesign worked on Muse. And the idea is to make it just like InDesign, but make websites. Now, it's still pretty new. You know, I think it's only a little over a year, maybe a year and a half old. So they don't have anything responsive on it, but they do have it. So remember we talked about earlier a mobile-specific site. So you can make a mobile, a tablet, and a desktop site specific using Muse, but they're not quite there yet with responsive, but they're getting there. I could see this tool being huge in 3 years from now or something. Because imagine if you just, you could do anything you wanted with this and never have to touch code. That is one problem, by the way. If anyone's actually interested in looking at that, you will not be able to look at any code. It is not meant for that, which turns a lot of people off, obviously. Yes?
Does Edge limit interactivity, or is it purely flat visual design?
You say that again? Or ask that again?
So is it outputting?
We're talking about are we talking about reflow?
Yes.
Okay.
Is it outputting a site, or is it outputting visual design?
Oh, so does it put out like an image? Yeah, okay, so no, it puts out HTML and it puts out CSS. The HTML is garbage and it's not meant to be used. Because you can go into Chrome, when you view it, you can go into Chrome and grab all the HTML and you can grab all the CSS and you can make a site with it. But it's not going to look great in other browsers because it's meant for just to be viewed. Now, the CSS is actually really good. Did I show you how you can get CSS from that? I don't think I did. So you can, let's say I grab this navigation bar. I go down to the bottom. Again, you can see the DOM. And so I go here, I call this navigation. So I just click this thing to the right of it, code. Shows me the CSS. I can go over to the clipboard, click the button. Now it's on my clipboard and I can put it onto, if I wanted to put it in my website. So if the developer, this would be very handy for a developer. And the developer might agree with the CSS or disagree and maybe want to do it their own way, but it's a great way to start out. And actually, I think the CSS is pretty strong. So, how was that? Yeah? Okay. Yes?
Scott, with all of the different devices and all the resolutions of Samsung and Android and Apple 4 or 5, is there any way around doing every resolution if you have a highly viewed site? Still view all those optimally?
Yeah, you could have 50 media queries if you want, and that would actually make this tool a better argument. Because 50 Photoshop files is crazy, or you do your wireframer. So do you use balsamic? no, you don't use Balsamic, but whatever tool you use, you'd have to have a bunch of different, you'd have to use a lot of different images or whatever you want to say, PDFs, however you want to work. Where Reflow, you could do it all in there and all in one document. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, also for developers, if you're working, I work with developers who are doing responsive for the first time. Often they start with standard tablet, mobile, but then there's 80 other resolutions. So is there any way to not code for the 80 other resolutions or best practice to kind of get around that and not have to constantly tweak?
I guess I don't have a good answer for that. I would say, yeah, if you have to, no, you'd have to tweak, I think. I don't know, does anyone else have a better answer than that? Yes.
You can use min and max width to bridge the gap in between all devices. So I think you want to try to plan to get your major devices and have your CSS be fluid enough to expand the ones in between. And certainly find with 60 different things.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, it kind of comes down to you have to let go of some control at every single device and just trust that the code is going to present the information, the content, in a way that's still useful and still looks mostly good, then break where facility anywhere. It's not so perfect.
It's hard when you don't have the 40 devices to test. You
Yeah.
just have to say, it's going to be good.
Oh, I'll add some links. This is going to be a really long list. There are ways of testing this stuff online. I always say it's much better to test on your device, the actual device. But there are things you can do online. I use Sauce Labs to test all the different devices and all that. But it's good, but it's nothing like having it in your hand and actually
There's
testing
no
it.
substitute for having a real device.
Yeah, absolutely. Browser Stack is another one. I'll get a few links there. There's some really good sites out there. Yes?
In Reflow, can you like string things together and do like click-throughs or
No, there's no interactivity. So yeah, I would have loved to have made that the slider, and have all the other ones come in, but right now you can't do that. Yeah, it's sort of like Photoshop, that would be the same deal. Yes?
But you could work remotely with a client to show them the breakpoints and how it.
Yeah, so say you're going over it with your client using Skype or whatever, screen sharing. You could show them that way. You could also upload as long as they're using Chrome, you could upload the CSS and HTML, and as far as I know, they should be able to see it just as well as you. So you could either use Reflow or they could see the HTML or the page that renders the HTML and CSS. Yeah, because that's tough, right? Because not all your clients are going to have Reflow, I would imagine. So yeah, that might be a better way to do it. Also the screenshots too. So you can take several screenshots, which is a lot easier than creating different Photoshop files, right? You take screenshots of different sizes and then put in a PDF or something and send it to them. Yes?
I'm sorry, maybe this was part of the question. When you had all the different menu boxes up at the top, and then when it hit the breaking point, it all just became menu. So did you have to create a separate drop-down menu? So like when it would break, then all of a sudden a drop-down menu would appear in its replacement?
Yeah, so here it's just all visual. So you basically just make it look like a drop-down. And then when you create it for real, you'd actually have to put the code in to do that. Is that what you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, so you don't actually create, that's a good question. You don't actually create like the drop downs in here or anything like that. It's all just visual.
Okay, so that would be like another media query, like when at this size options turn into drop down menu, I guess.
Yeah, okay, so what you can normally do is you could style it in a certain way, and you wouldn't necessarily make a drop down, but it would look like a drop down. Or you could have JavaScript add the drop down for you. Yeah. Yes?
I made a quick site in Muse. They put it into Business Catalyst. Can I put it back into Edgeflow and grab the code that way?
Yeah, you can actually grab the code, right? I mean, you can download it into Dreamweaver or Edge Code or however you get the HTML. Or you can go online and just view source and grab it. Yeah, you can grab it any way you want, because basically Muse, what it does is it uploads the HTML and the CSS to the server, and then you can just pull it down however you want. You can actually go into Business Catalyst in the admin and get it that way as well. It's not pretty, I'll warn you. That's why they don't let you see it. But it works. I think it's like, div underscore 45 underscore CTUXPA. Anything else?
Accessibility. Is there any challenges, responsive design and section 508
Yes.
compliance?
Yeah, there are. I'm not an expert in that, so I wouldn't be able to speak the specifics, but there are a lot of people working on that, and the browsers are all trying to sort that out too. Fortunately, a lot of the screen readers are a little bit behind, so it makes it really, really tough when they're not trying to keep up, because at the end of the day, it's really for them.
Do you have screen readers for mobile devices?
I don't know. Responsive applies to
I'm not sure.
PCs too, so
Yeah,
I don't know.
it's a great question. I'm not sure.
Go up to the desktop. Great.
Yeah, so people are working on it, but I don't really have any details. I'm not going to add a link to my list. Did that do it? All right, well, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.